Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday.
Why the American consumer should be grateful for our dog Shep. I'm honored that you saw the notice and decided to find out what this is all about. What's that? No, Shep is no longer with us, having died some 60 years ago. That's why it's to be grateful for our dog and not grateful to our dog. But where are my manners? Please, come in and make yourself comfortable. Now, before we get to the true account of why the American consumer should be grateful for our dog Shep, a bit of background might be helpful. It's the early to mid-1950s, and 6 or so miles to the east of Battleground, Washington. Having lived in town for a few years, we moved out to the woods. Living with me were my mom, dad, my 2 younger brothers, and, of course, our dog Shep. Now, to make a long introduction short, our dad left us, and so it was just Mom, Joe, Tim, me, and our dog Shep. Our dad left and never came back. We lived in a one-room shack, and we were quite poor. 20 years pass. The location where he was living was given to me. So my wife and 3 children drove to his house in Oregon, and he gave me a picture that I'd never seen before. This picture, showing a section of the one-room shack, along with our outhouse, a clothes rack on the porch, and a clothes line from the shack to the outhouse. By the way, the dog to the right of the outhouse was not our dog, Shep. Anyway, my father relayed a few facts about the picture. First of all, he told us that it was taken on the day that he left us. Second, he kind of laughed and said that my brother Joe, standing here in the middle with the bib overalls on, had been chasing me around the yard with an axe or a sledgehammer. But it was too heavy for him, and he had to drag it along behind him as he chased me. It's shown here in the background to the right. Now here's a picture of Joe nearly 70 years later, still sporting bib overalls and having an axe nearby. But I digress, and it's probably best to just tell the story of how it came to pass why the American consumer should be grateful for our dog Shep. There's a tremendous need for people to be aware that seemingly ordinary events in our lives might actually be changing the course of history, to let people like you know why the American consumer should be grateful for our dog Shep. Once again, about the year 1952, my father and mother divorced. Mac drank and was becoming an alcoholic. While people have said that he did not provide for his wife and boys, that is not entirely true. In fact, as a 5-year-old boy, I recall the opposite, awakening one morning to discover that my dad had brought home a 5-gallon glass jug filled with pickled pig's feet. I was one lucky kid to have such a treasure under the kitchen sink, and many times my hands and arms were in that tinted brine seeking the elusive pig's foot. On another occasion, my dad brought home a small, skinned, and dressed-out bear cub, which my mother thought looked very much like a baby. He told my mother to bake it, and he would be back later to eat it. I mean, how many kids have a dad who would bring home such delicacies? Actually, as mentioned, this disgusted my mother immensely, since she could not get away from the furless bear cub. Nevertheless, the bear cub was baked, and for the record, I don't believe my dad ever got drunk enough to eat the roasted runt. And appropriately, my mother buried the beast in the newly opened Bear Cub Cemetery behind our house in Battleground. With the divorce final, my mother was left to raise her 3 boys by herself. I was the oldest at 6, Joe was 3, and Tim was 1. For the sake of accuracy, it should be noted that Joe was really 4 years old, but we didn't count his first year since he was so sick and puny-looking that we thought him to be alive only half the time. We would have considered it impolite teasing to let Joe have a birthday party. To demonstrate how ill and sickly Joe appeared, when he was brought home from the hospital after his birth, I tried to silence him with a small baseball bat given to me by my Grandpa McCoy. I received a thorough spanking, but this was most unjustly deserved. You see, I was under the impression that my dad had brought home another delicacy. Baby Joe sure looked an awful lot like that small-skinned and dressed-out bear cub. I thought this second bear cub really ought to have no life in him before we put him in the oven, like we did the first bear cub. Mom moved us into a one-room shack at the edge of the woods 6 or 7 miles east of Battleground, Washington. After ascending the 3 or 4 steps to the porch and stepping through the door to the left, you entered the house. My bed was on the right. Off the end of the bed was Mom's chair. Beyond that was the small wood stove that heated the house. To the left of the front door was the small table, and beyond it, the kitchen. It was here that the indoor plumbing was located, a single pipe running directly to the sink from an open spring on the hill. Water was heated on the electric burner. Though the house smacked of substandard conditions and evoked the word poverty, the interior walls, if viewed today, would bring sighs of envy even from the wealthy. The walls were covered with beautiful, hardwood, tongue-and-groove paneling, suitable for royal mansions. This rich wall treatment spoke of familial and geographic closeness to the sawmills, planer, and the cut-up plant. A small 3-sided open chest near the center of the room permitted Mom to hang a large piece of green material between the closet and the wall, thus creating a room for her bed and the one where we placed Joe. The springs in Joe's bed were so loose that the thin mattress sunk down in the middle, nearly touching the floor. This sagging feature prevented him from tumbling out of it. If he had fallen out of it, he might have been seriously hurt, and we would have been forced to take another year away from him. It was during this time that I began to work with Tim's speech development, coaching him in proper enunciation and verbalization. Between the ages of 1 and 3, many of the speech patterns are formed for life, and the importance of proper vocalization of vowels and consonants goes without saying. I coached Tim and used the listen and repeat approach to proper speaking that would serve him well in the future. Tim's clarity of speech and mastery of labials and gutturals were most remarkable. He was a good student and minded his teacher, as all little boys should. In fact, I only needed to signal him in a special way, usually by nodding my head, and Tim would begin speaking in a clear voice, uncharacteristically clear, especially for a 2-year-old boy. Needless to say, I was quite proud of my youngest brother. In front of the shack was the car that we owned. Here's a picture of it that shows the car as well as myself and my 2 younger brothers, and that's Uncle Alf's barn in the background.
Hey, Uncle Alf, your barn door's open.
Anyway, our car was a faded blue Lincoln Continental, probably a 1947 to 1950 model. It was pretty well beat up and out in the sun too long. But the only mechanical problem with our late model luxury car was the power window on the driver's side. Once lowered to the open position, it would not go up again. While the fresh air was appreciated in the summer, the cold winds of winter made Mom mutter sounds that we did not understand. Obviously, she did not have the proper speech development lessons early in life. It's probably because she did not have an older brother. Anyway, the cardboard window used to keep out the cold quickly warped and fell to pieces during the rainy parts of the seasons. But a day came when a miracle happened. While playing around in the car, one of us pushed the upside of the power window button. A short lurching sound was heard, and the very top of the window became visible. It had budged just enough above the door to grab the window. Aided by fingers and hands both inside and out, the window was able to be closed. What a day! Mom was elated to have the window up on her side of the car. You should have seen our mom smile at us. Even though it was a hot summer day, she was most happy to have that window up and closed. The rejoicing of the family was tempered by Mom's stern admonition never to touch the power window button. With her eyes riveted on me, we were told never, ever, forever and ever touch that power window button. With sober faces and wide eyes, we listened to Mom and nodded our heads in the affirmative. She was repeatedly assured that we would never, ever, forever and ever touch that awful button. About a day later, my brothers and I were in the car waiting for Mom to return from some errand in the store. I believe it was Sheldon Onsdorf's meat market, but I'm not sure. Anyway, a great debate arose within that parentless car about whether or not the power window would close again if the downside of the dreaded button were pushed. Somehow, during these hypothesizing and discussions, when confusion reigned, the seductive button was pushed. The driver's side power window obeyed as the top of the window glass disappeared into the door. Silent panic broke out in the luxurious Lincoln. Immediately, I pushed the upside of the dreaded button, knowing no chance existed of the window returning to its closed position. The window was open wide, and there was no way for us three boys to close it. As Mom approached the car, we remained silent. Perhaps, we thought, she might not notice. Or possibly she may have been tired of it being closed and would appreciate it being open. Maybe, just maybe, since it was summertime, she would be thankful to us for getting a little fresh air in the car. Yes, that was it. Our Mom would rejoice so greatly in our wise pushing of the dreaded button that she would immediately go back into the store for some of the best candy that they had there. Oh, what a day! Rejoice, Joe and Tim. Our Mom might have our pictures taken and put up on posters around town. Smile at her, little brothers, for we might even be able to ride in the town's float as heroes with a sign that read,
"Wow, those McCoy boys really love their mother."
What a time it would be, a day dreamed about ever since you were a little kid. As Mom came around the front of the car and to the windowless door, we sat quietly inside with visions of sugar plums dancing in our heads and innocent, angelic smiles on our faces. Reality returned to us rather quickly, and, being the oldest of her three sons, I immediately became the target of Mom's righteous wrath. Timing became important now. I had to wait until she stopped for a moment when she would be drawing a breath and before she could let loose with her continued verbal fury. I would have only one chance at this, and I would have to make it count. That day, my timing was nearly perfect. My opportunity came, and I nodded my head to Tim. In a clear, loud voice with enunciation that would make any speech therapist proud, Tim rewarded all of my long hours of work with him. From inside that faded blue Lincoln Continental with the driver's side window down, Mom heard Tim's 3 words, "Joe did it." Sometime during those years, Mom's name had been given to or selected by a company that tested food and home products. I believe it was called Home Testing Institute, and Mom never knew how her name was chosen or why we became one of the chosen households. I have always assumed it was because we were just one of America's typical, normal, representative families. Anyway, from time to time, we received packages with food, household items, and personal products for us to test. When food items were to be tested, we prepared, consumed, and evaluated them. Sometimes the Institute sent 2 items for comparison. For example, 2 tins of canned meat. Canned meats in tins marked only A and B were to be prepared, eaten, and evaluated. The evaluations were to be done both during and after the meal, and as a result, Mom would fix 1 can, and as we ate it, she'd ask us questions that were on the test sheet. The questions typically asked about texture, saltiness, ease of preparation, flavor, and aftertaste. At other times, new products were tested with possible introduction into the marketplace and retail sales. I remember once that my mom received some jewelry to be tested. The Institute received the helpful comments and evaluations that my brothers and I offered regarding the jewelry's attractiveness, settings, and color coordination. The Institute received such comments from us as cool, yuck, neat, icky, spiffy. On an ordinary day, so uneventful that its date remains unknown to the author, a package arrived from the Institute with 2 new products to be tested. One was a shiny tin of canned French-cut green beans, and the other was an equally shiny container of canned crepe Suzettes. Now, despite the late model Lincoln Continental and the 3/4-inch hardwood tongue and groove paneling, we had no idea what a Suzette was. We knew what green beans were, and we called them string beans, but we had no idea of what the Suzettes were in that can. While we had never heard of Frenching a string bean, it was obvious that it had to do with the cutting of the bean. However, the creping of a Suzette was simply beyond us, and particularly so since we did not know what an uncreped Suzette even looked like. That afternoon, Mom prepared a meal of string beans, donning their characteristic French cut, and a mess of Suzettes that had most certainly been creped. Her presentation was excellent, and she sat us down to eat, her pencil at the ready to record our comments and observations. We began with the vegetables and gave them outstanding marks in all categories. On the evaluation sheet under other comments, we encouraged Mom to have the Institute send us more of those spiffy French beans. After having enjoyed the green beans, we turned our attention to the lazy-looking Suzettes, now appearing a tad more crepey than before. Especially since we were not quite as hungry as we were before we had those cool beans from France. Having convinced Tim of the honor of the initial taste, we watched him take the first tentative bite from his fork. He immediately spit it out and refused to eat any more. Mom's presentation of the meal was lost, and it took me nearly 5 minutes to talk Joe into taking the next bite. What finally convinced him was when I told him that just 1 bite could add years to his life. Joe placed a soggy bit of the suspect food on his tongue and closed his mouth. His eyes wandered from side to side, scorning me in the process. Having imitated his younger brother, Joe firmly took his plate and marched out of the house. He stepped off the porch, curled down around the underside of the porch, and headed down the bunny trail. With pencil and the Institute's evaluation sheet in hand, Mom went after Joe. Tim and I followed them, thinking Joe would dump the contents of his plate into the outhouse hole off the left of the bunny trail. Instead, Joe tromped to the right and down the path to where our dog Shep was chained. Joe put the plate on the ground and coaxed Shep to eat the crepe Suzette. Shep sniffed the Institute's offering and crawled back into his doghouse. Joe snorted, "Our dog won't eat this crap." "Crepe," countered Tim with bold clarity, once again pleasing his speech tutor. Mom was busily writing on the Institute's evaluation sheet. Just what she wrote is unknown. Someday, should the Institute's archives reveal the contents of that evaluation, we may all learn what it said. However, it is quite likely that we will never know what was written on that paper or what was discussed at the Institute's meeting when the decision was made. But of this we may be certain. The American consumer, when taking down can after can of French-cut green beans from the millions of supermarket shelves across this great land, and never having to be tempted by or subjected to a single tin of canned crepe Suzettes, owes a great deal of thanks for our dog Shep.